Welcome to this Mastery Empowerment course from New Earth One Network. This is designed exclusively for your higher self connection and embodiment. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're talking about sovereignty and actually how we move into unity, into peace, and rekindle democracy. My guest today is Gates McKibbon, who brought forward information, channelings from 3 former presidents. And she shares this wisdom in her book, Epic Steps, Rekindling Democracy, Peace, and Unity. Gates, welcome to this show. Thank you for being here.
I'm so pleased to be here and to share the messages that I received from 3 presidents, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Eisenhower. And I must tell you that the day we are doing this today, which is September 10th, 2021, is precisely 20 years since Eisenhower appeared to dictate his messages to me in 2 days, September 10th and September 11th, 2021. So it's not random that you and I are talking today. And that we'll be discussing some of these very important ideas that your listeners are interested in and that the presidents wanted to communicate with us.
Yes, and that was not planned. That was not planned by us anyway, but on the bigger picture, I'm sure it was orchestrated. Let's start with, what was going on when this all came about?
In the mid-90s, I was working in the corporate world. I had a high-level, high-stress job and became very sick, chronically sick with pneumonia. Finally, my doctor said, you can get your health back or keep your job, but you can't have both. So I quit my job and took a leap of faith into the void in order to regain my health and hopefully also my spirit. And almost immediately after that happened, I decided to start with my morning pages, with writing in a journal every morning to see if I could find my way through the new context I had for my life. Immediately, literally the first words that I got ready to write were clearly from my deceased father, who showed up to help me through that time in my life. And also, as it turned out, to be a conduit to help messages come down from the higher frequencies on a number of pivotal topics that matter to all of us in our lives. It turned out that my journals that were accumulating on my shelf, one after another, ended up being published as 7 volumes in a series. That happened in the late 1990s. And I was thinking at the time, well, I'm pretty good at this, actually. But I also thought my father was helping me with my ability to be clairaudient, which is really what it is. I'm simply a scribe for spirit. I was living my life back in the corporate world, but as a consultant rather than a full-time employee. And in the summer of 2001, I got a tap on the shoulder, as you call it. And I had a sense that a very strong spirit wanted to connect with me. So I grabbed a pad of paper, a pen, sat down on my living room sofa, cleared my rational mind, and Jefferson arrived. I know it sounds almost unfathomable that I would be working with a being such as Jefferson. I thought it was unfathomable. But at the same time, I thought, well, if he's here and he wants to dictate messages, I'll write them. And that's exactly what happened. He and I collaborated when I was available for about a month. Then Lincoln popped in with his messages. I wrote his messages. And the evening of September 9th, 2001, I finally finished working with Jefferson, which was very difficult because the burdens that he carried when he was president and the way he talked about them really did strike me in my heart. I was just almost in complete heartache working with him. Immediately when I was finished with Lincoln, Eisenhower showed up and said, okay, I'm ready. And I said, I'm not. I'm exhausted. I can't do this. And he said, tomorrow, we'll get started tomorrow. And in fact, when I got up the next morning, September 10th, 2001, he was there. And he dictated all of his messages to me in 2 days. The morning of September 11th, after the World Trade Center attack, he was there and he said to me, now you know why I insisted that we get started yesterday. We're going to finish today. And being the general and clear-eyed, articulate being he is, we finished right before midnight on September 11th, 2001. So that's a little bit of background about how I began writing messages dictated to me by spirit, and also then what happened when the presidents arrived and asked me to collaborate with them. Those messages stayed in my computer for 15, 16, 17 years. And it wasn't until I began to be concerned about the state of democracy in the United States that I went back to those files and read the messages over again and decided they need to get out into the world. And now they are. Epic Steps has been published.
Epic Steps. Yes, beautiful, a beautiful book. I'm so pleased that you're here to talk about this because it really is important when we are looking at our divisive world, even in our beloved communities, even in the spirituality community, families, divisiveness. And this is a personal journey. So when we're talking sovereignty, as we're moving on New Earth, what does sovereignty mean to you, and what do you get that to mean from the channelings of these three presidents?
That's such an important question because the founding fathers were absolutely committed to the idea that we are spirit in human embodiment, that we exist eternally, and that we derive from source. We all derive from the same source, which is love, and that our spirits come into human embodiment. The temporary vessels that our spirits occupy for the purpose of expanding love throughout all of creation. The question then is, how do we create a larger institution of government that is rooted in that principle, in the idea that we are all divine, we share divinity. That is the one commonality that connects all of us. And also we are walking the earth plane. We're living here together. So how do we create an enlightened institution that allows us to engage in self-government, which they decided is the most appropriate way to maintain our sovereignty, our divinity, our collective connection, and to move together toward oneness with our divine source. That's why we're all here. How does government then enable us to do that? How can we be supported by organizational structures so that all of us individually and together can move toward our divine source, can become closer to one with source? And that was actually the question they asked themselves, and they were convinced that democracy, republic, self-government, whatever you want to call it, is the best structure to enable that to happen. And also the best way to approach how we live together individually and in the context of community here on planet Earth, because we're all here together. So how can we make the most of it? There were a number of principles Jefferson outlined in his messages to me that have been so meaningful to me as I've pursued my own life and my own choices. And the fundamental idea behind all of this is that there needs to be a dynamic equilibrium between the individual and the community, between independence and interdependence, between freedom and equality, between self-interest and the greater good. And the imperative of democracy is that we engage with it in a way that honors both sides of that paradox. It has to be both ways, and they both deserve our respect, our involvement, and our love.
Well, with what's going on right now, I see more people aware of this process of government, local governments. More people are paying attention now to school board administrators, school boards, county commissioners, where we didn't give a care or a thought, but now we're starting to really care. Let's talk about finding this equilibrium between the individual and the community, right? We know that that is a very fine balance. So what do we do when we see that it's out of whack? Do we approach from a heart-centered space? Do we hope that others, or see that others may just surrender to this heart-based approach? Because it seems like there's kind of a noisy crowd at times that might be disrespectful of that. And so if it's so divisive or polarized, how could we overcome this? Did the presidents give us any indication of this?
Jefferson talks about the balance between freedom and equality. And I think that dynamic underlies your question in a way. And there also is another dimension to it, but I will talk about freedom and equality first. He says that freedom by itself, if it overtakes everything else, yes, does allow individuals to gain wealth and power and whatever they want, but it suffocates equality, meaning that there will be, in the process of that happening, there will be a lot of people whose freedoms are eroded or limited. That absolutely will happen if freedom is run rampant. And that's what he calls it, freedom run rampant. And that is not acceptable. Equality, on the other hand, if equality, if that end of the continuum is emphasized too much, in other words, if we're thinking overly about the greater good, then individual rights and freedoms are sacrificed. And so we have to be conscious, consciously with both, with freedom and equality. How do we do that? And that's really your question. How do we do that? It starts with who we are and what we carry within our heart, which is love, which is gratitude, which is forgiveness and compassion. That is the non-negotiable in all of this. It has to start there, because the minute we try to approach the divisiveness you're talking about from a place of either or, good, bad, right, wrong, then we're buying into that perspective, that divided paradigm, and we lose our light. We lose our ability to hold the love that really is the essence of who we are. So the only way to start this process is to be fundamentally so certain that our being is that we are beings of love, and never lose sight of that, never walk away from it, never compromise that, no matter what else is going on around us. We can't lose that. And then we walk into whatever the situation is with that love, with our open heart. Now, we might be criticized, we might be ridiculed. It might appear that those who are sowing division are a lot more powerful than we are. Well, maybe temporarily they are, but nothing is more powerful than our capacity to embody the divine. And I know this sounds, it maybe sounds not very practical, but I honestly believe the most practical way for us to live is in constantly honoring our divinity and the divinity of others. So Jefferson had 4 recommendations that I'd like to highlight, if that's appropriate. 4 recommendations for self-government, responsibilities of anyone living in the context of self-government. And all of these need to be honored, and we need to engage in these responsibilities with love, with love. The first responsibility is education. Stay informed, make sure that we know what's going on, and to do that, we have to have a free press. So stay educated, remain informed. That doesn't mean going crazy with all of the ridiculous cacophony that's out there, but in a grounded, reasonable way, stay informed, and always return to our heart when we are getting that information. Secondly, participate. Get involved, vote, get involved, speak out, use our voice, own our power. If we don't do that, especially if we don't use our voice from a love-based place, if we don't live our power with love, then we are abdicating our responsibility in self-government. And inevitably, those who don't live that way will begin to have a more powerful voice. The third one, and this one really gets at your question, Loren. The third one is discourse, engage in discourse, which is where there's disagreement, debate, but debate in an open-minded, open-hearted way so that we can move through that debate, move through those differences of opinion, and hopefully find common ground. Because we'll never find common ground if we don't engage in respect-based discourse and debate. Again, doing that with love. And finally, I've been using the word respect a lot. Respect is the fourth one. Respect others with generosity and deep caring. And that goes across the board, whether people agree with us or not, whether they're part of the polarization or not. If we lose our ability to respect, then we've lost our ability to strengthen self-government. So this is a long-winded answer to your question, but honestly, it's a very complex question. How do we approach polarization? What do we do about divisiveness? And the weakest thing we could do is be limited by it, is buy into it by saying, well, it's so powerful and it's so intractable, there's really nothing we can do. Or if I use my voice, it won't be heard because there's so much else out there that is contrary to what I believe in and what I want to say. We need to acknowledge that. We certainly shouldn't be denying it, but we don't need to give it power.
Thank you for that. Really important there. The words decency come up, respect, honor, divinity, and I love how it's all heart-based and love-based, open-minded, open-hearted. When we are educating ourselves, staying educated, staying informed, don't lose sight of this heart-based centerness. So this is a little bit about discernment. Did any of the presidents speak to you on our own discernment and how we would recognize any of that when we're moving into fear?
Certainly, fear creates a feedback loop that goes directly to our heart. We feel fear in our heart. And so when we start to feel attacked that way, then the question becomes, how can we return to love? Because we can't be discerning if we can't return to love in our heart. Discernment goes totally by the wayside if we allow ourselves to be limited by fear. And so the recommendation, and this is interesting because I'm going to talk a little bit now about Lincoln. Lincoln, as everyone knows, was president during one of the most difficult times in American history. The founding fathers had not addressed the big issue that existed before the Constitution and after the Constitution was adopted, and that was the issue of slavery. How can we have a democracy? How can we have self-government if we allow slavery to exist? The founding fathers were more interested in unity among all of the colonies. So all 13 would sign on to the Constitution and create the United States of America than they were about abolishing slavery or addressing the issue of slavery. So they looked the other way. And Lincoln inherited the issue. He stepped into the presidency when the United States was a house divided. He calls it like two branches of a family tree that had grown apart. The North was an economy based on industrialization and immigration, and the South was an economy based on plantation life, agriculture, and slavery that fueled all of it. The Civil War began, and the burden Lincoln shouldered was the appalling death that occurred as a result of that war on both sides. The deaths are unfathomable. The only way he was able to deal with that was to, in meditation every night, to go into the higher frequencies and gather together the spirits of all of those from the North and the South who had died that day. He brought them together and asked them to forgive each other, asked them to forgive the person who took their life, because he believed the only way we can ever unify is if we're capable of forgiveness. And that's why he urged that forgiveness on the part of all of those spirits who had just that day gone to the other side. His purpose, the purpose of his presidency fundamentally was to preserve the union that was necessary if we were going to maintain a self-government, maintain democracy. And he deeply believed that with all of the divisions that existed, with actually the secession of the southern states and the treasonous acts that derived from that, the only path to unity was the path of forgiveness, also the path of justice and mercy. So then, to your question, how do we discern? How do we discern the guidance that's there from spirit? How do we discern what is our truth or a truth that we can act upon? We can discern it when we have forgiven, when we have love in our heart, when compassion overcomes everything else, when all of those divine, enlightened capabilities that we all have, when that's what resides in our heart, then we can discern how to move forward. Maybe it is that we, as you were saying, we start attending local school board meetings because we want to have our voices heard. Maybe we start a petition for something that we feel is important. Maybe we go to a local farmer's market and we thank all the people who are growing healthy, delicious food and let them know how much we appreciate their efforts, not only by expressing our gratitude, but buying what they've produced. Who knows? But when we are acting from discernment, we are acting with joy. There's joy. We know we've discerned guidance from spirit accurately when we're enveloped in joy. And I'd love to be able to provide a list of prescriptions on what people can do to be more actively or effectively discerning, but really it comes down to, are you experiencing joy in this moment with what you're doing and who you are? And if you are, then I'd say you've discerned some pretty good guidance from spirit.
Great, great answer, Gates, because you nailed it. And again, this is our way forward. This is, we know that we talk a lot about New Earth. New Earth is a vibration, and
Mhm.
it is this love vibration, and it is forgiveness, it's integrity, it's compassion. We've got this love wave coming in, this
Mhm.
new energy of our universe, this evolution of humanity towards love, towards compassion, towards the divinity of who we are. And at one time, it's, if we look out in the external world, to me it seems as if there's going to be a point where we, the people, no longer tolerate mudslinging. I mean, listen to that name. I mean, I remember in political science as a student, mudslinging. And as a kid, it was like, why is that even allowed? And so I think the public will get to a point where we no longer tolerate politicians bad mouthing others, speaking poorly of others. Do you see that day coming? And
Totally.
yes,
Yes, we vote them out. We have the power to vote them out. And if we want to vote them out, we organize, organize, organize. We use our voice again and again and again. We do everything in our power. That's how the mudslinging is going to stop. It's not going to stop because we say this is bad and I can't stand it anymore. It's going to stop because enough of us come together and say this is unacceptable. We're going to vote people into positions of leadership who represent our values and believe in what the kind of future we want to create for ourselves, our families, our community, our nation, and the planet. And when we begin to demand that, when we begin to identify people who can do that, and then do everything in our power and our creativity, because let's face it, we've got massive power and creativity if we choose to use it, then we can start to have a significant influence on the decisions that are being made at all levels of government and the enlightened way that our leaders are bringing us into the future in alignment with us, in collaboration with us, not as people who hold all the power and we've given it over to them and now we have to do whatever they say or tolerate whatever they do. No, they are our servants because we voted them into office. And so that's the whole idea behind self-government, is that we take responsibility. We have rights. We also take responsibility. And apathy. Apathy is one of the worst factors that can undermine democracy. And the apathy can come from, oh, nothing I do can make a difference, or I'm too weak, or the powers that be are too corrupt, or the people who want to manipulate the population are too good at it and nothing I do can ever help. All of those voices are the voices of apathy. We've got to transcend those and we've got to, again, move into our heart, step into our power, have our voice, organize, and vote people into leadership positions who represent the future we want to see happen and that we want to create together.
let's create that demand. We are going to
Yes.
create the demand. And always know that, with this voice of love, speaking with the voice of love, there's an app called Nextdoor, and that seems to be a platform where people just spout their complaints and blame others. Light workers can use these platforms to keep hope inspired and to say pleasant words and nice things. And so, letters to the editor, right? We can really seed consciousness. And apathy, it seems that there were people, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, that I remember even on this program, it was raised, why should we even vote? What happens if we don't vote? Well, we lose a lot if we don't vote. So that voting is very key. And I think people have witnessed the power of their vote. And so I think the collective is aware much more than they were in the past about their power this way. So that's a good sign, don't you think?
I totally agree. I agree. We're waking up. We're waking up from our apathy, and I think that will continue. We're getting wake up calls every day. Oh my goodness, they're out there. I stay informed, but I also don't allow myself to be overwhelmed by the information or to feel powerless when I get the information. It's like I wake up in the morning, I check out what's in 2 online news services, read what I want to read, and then go about my day living in love and joy.
Yes.
So that's how I do it, and I'm sure a lot of others do as well. I'd like to, if it's okay with you, I'd love to move into what Eisenhower had to say, because it is to some extent also related to what we're talking about.
Yes, because as of this taping, our country just left Afghanistan. And this ties in to what Eisenhower was telling you.
Absolutely. Again, I think the timing of this is so interesting that you and I are talking today after 2 weeks ago, it was finally acknowledged that that 20-year war in Afghanistan, a forever war, not only accomplished nothing, but that supposedly the agendas that were supposedly being addressed, but really weren't. But it devastated so many families and so much of the culture all because our military wanted to do some saber rattling, all because they created another war, a war on terror. You see, we had the Cold War, which enabled the military to siphon off trillions of dollars from the federal budget over decades. And then when the Cold War was over, it was sort of like, oh my gosh, who's the enemy now? And we went through a short period of time where actually the military budget was made smaller because there wasn't an obvious source of threat. Come 9/11, 2001, oh my goodness, what a gift to the military. We now have a war on terror. We now need to spend many more trillions of dollars. And the war in Afghanistan is proof. $2 trillion were spent in that country. $2 trillion. And over that 20 years, we were given misinformation about what was going on there. We were never really told the truth for 20 years. So let me go back to what Eisenhower said in his messages. I loved working with Eisenhower because he's so clear and articulate, and ever the general, ever the president. And he started out by saying, before World War II, the United States was 19th in the world in terms of its military capacity. 19th. It's hard for us to imagine that, given what's happened in the last number of decades. During World War II, once we entered the war, we put everything we had behind supporting the military so that war could be won. And after the war, 2 things happened. One is the military loved the power they had so recently attained. And all of the corporations that got government contracts to build all of that material for the military loved the money they were making. So when Eisenhower was president, he saw a pattern occurring, which was, well, we have a new enemy now. It's the Soviet Union. And so that was actually a very comfortable thing. And I know it sounds radical for me to say this, but the United States and Russia were in a symbiotic relationship. Both military, the military structures of both countries needed an enemy. And so we could be each other's enemy. So, we would say, well, the Soviet Union is gaining this capacity, so now we need to build this capacity because they're our enemy. Eisenhower saw all of this happening. And when he left his presidency, he warned us against the military-industrial complex, which so many of us have heard about and know about. He was saying, beware. We are turning our power over to the military because they love their power, and the industrial complex or corporations because they love all the money they're making from these government contracts. What he said in his messages to me was, when he was president, he argued for the military being constructed around fitness and flexibility instead of permanence and posturing. And he saw the military engaging in posturing and permanence, meaning we need to have this permanent, massive military capability so we can posture to our enemy and others around the world that we have massive military power. He was arguing that fitness and flexibility makes so much more sense. It uses a lot fewer resources, which we could use for other things. It allows us to turn on a dime if there is a threat. We can call in the reserves or whatever, and we're fit. We maintain the ability to be resilient, to be flexible, to be responsive, but we don't have to spend a lot of money and build a massive military to do it. 9/11 occurred, and guess what? We have this massive military based on posturing and permanence, and they weren't able to do anything about it. We suddenly have a war on terror that's being fought in a very different way that our posturing and permanence can't address. We also continue to waste massive resources, and I mean waste massive resources, fighting these wars. Eisenhower says at the end of his messages, the purpose of the military should be based on generosity and goodwill and diplomacy that can lead us to world peace. That we have absolutely no justification for having a military that does anything other than that. Yes, there might be threats. And so, yes, maybe, well, we do need to be able to address those. But when you consider the extraordinary resources that are being sucked up by maintaining a military based on posturing and permanence, and what if we reallocated those resources for climate change, to create higher levels of global health, to be more generous with how we can build capability across countries, capability for being self-sufficient and self-determination. What if we shared what we now call our military resources and what we now call our military for the sole purpose of bringing about world peace based on goodwill and diplomacy? We could do that if we chose to.
Oh my goodness. That would show the world. That would be a great leader of love, wouldn't it? You know
Yes.
that light workers have been invoking divine governance, divine hearts in the leading officials to do this, but that makes so much sense. Generosity and goodwill and diplomacy that leads us to peace. World peace should be our military's goal. That's interesting. You know, Costa Rica, they did away with their military in the 40s. They don't have a military.
Don't they have universal health care too?
Yes, they do.
Yes. They're using their resources for the health and goodwill of their communities.
And the okay, there's another thing. You cannot cut down a tree without a permit, even if you own the land. That right
Hmm.
there is respecting, right? Respecting the environment. There's that word, respect. And so you said, wouldn't it be interesting if we used the military resources for forest management? These things that help. Isn't that wonderful? That's a brilliant idea. Write that to the letter to the editor. Every one of us should actually.
Absolutely. I live on the West Coast, and summers now for the last 4 or 5 years have been nothing but drought, heat, and smoke. And the air quality is just perpetually unhealthy. So why don't we? I mean, it's clear we've got a problem. Climate change is sending us strong signals that something is out of balance. We could engage in forest management. We could do a beautiful job of forest management if we allocated resources from the military to do that. We could assist firefighters who put themselves physically in harm's way and breathe that horrific air in order to stop the fires that are inevitable now. They're inevitable because of the conditions that we live with now due to climate change. We could have military assisting them. So, and even if we sent military resources early when the fires start, when we can flood the situation with personnel to fight those fires, they might not end up being as horrific as they are. There's so much that could be done if we thought of the investment we're making in the military as a pot of resources we can dip into for all sorts of positive purposes.
Yes,
Why not?
absolutely. Why not? Think of all the aircraft carriers, and they could be turned into slurry bombers for fires or helping control it. All right, really inspirational. It brings hope when we know that the love within us is amplifying and that we are evolving as a species. This is where our evolution takes us with love and compassion. And so the good news is, as we wrap up our conversation, we're going to talk about common ground. Diplomacy is a good word, maybe conscious diplomacy or cosmic diplomacy. But conscious diplomacy is really being able to hear another person's grievances and show them respect. But then this common ground, the common ground, the good news for me, in my perspective, no matter how divided it is, even in our spiritual community, the good news is the common ground is love.
Yes,
And we
it
all
is.
want freedom. We all want equality. In that sense, we all want the same things. So that's 50% of the work right there. We're close.
I agree with you. I agree. I'm so I'm so gratified to hear you say that and to sum it up that way because it's where everything begins and ends. because we begin from love. We derive from love. And that's what unites us all. That is what connects us. That is how we're going to find common ground. We can't possibly create common ground if we don't approach it from a love-based place. We can't do it.
Yes, beautiful. Well, it's all about love, baby, isn't it? It's all about love. And all of us who chose this incarnation to be here at this time knew we could do it, and we're in it. So we like to say, can you be love in the face of everything? Yes, love and compassion, forgiveness. And so we're on a journey, and it begins with ourselves first, and then we can radiate it and amplify it to the world. Gates McKibbon, this book, Epic Steps Rekindling Democracy, Unity, and Peace, is so exquisite with the vibration of those beings that you channeled, those presidents. And we thank you for bringing it forward. It was just published in 2019. This is where you, as a channel, trust the information, and now you're sharing it with the world. And
Yes.
again, it's all love. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be having this conversation with you. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Gates, and thank you, everyone, for watching us. Thank you too, and send those letters to the editor. Thank you, the voice of love.